A heartfelt thank you to every new member who made a first-time gift during the fall fundraising campaign. Know that you are essential to the future of independent, community-driven news. We're so happy you're here.
From Michigan Public, this is It's Just Politics. I'm Zoe Clark.
And I'm Rick Pluta.
We are 1 week from a partial government shutdown at the state capitol.
That's what will happen if there is not a balanced budget by the end of next Tuesday in Lansing.
But are voters paying attention? And if a shutdown were to happen, what are the political consequences? Let's turn,
as we often do,
to Pollster Richard Czuba for the answers. He is the founder of Glengariff Group. Richard, hi.
Hey, good to be here.
So good to have you. First off, what do we know about Michiganders' knowledge of and attention to the budget standoff in Lansing?
They don't know much. Let's be blunt about that. You know, I have this saying, voters don't care how the sausage gets made. And this is a perfect example. Voters aren't paying attention to what the legislature is doing in Lansing right now. They don't care about this. They are starting to notice the fact that schools, for example, don't have budgets yet. That's starting to enter people's persona if they are associated with schools. But until a shutdown happens, voters just assume this is going to get taken care of until it doesn't.
Certainly, as you say, Richard, teachers, school administrators, universities, many in local governments, because their budgets all started 3 months ago, are aware. But you talk to so many voters. What do you make of the fact that there just isn't attention being paid, and yet folks seem to want their government to work?
Well, they certainly do want their government to work. In fact, they expect it to work. Passing a budget is one of those things that the voters are like, it's part of your job, just do it. And so when it doesn't happen, it becomes a really big deal with the voters. But at the same time, the voters have been through this. They've seen this happen. They see it come up to the deadline. They see it happen. So they don't get too put out about it until they miss the deadline.
In your survey, a large majority of voters in every partisan demographic, Republican, Democratic, Independent, they all favor a law requiring the legislature to have the school's budget done by July 1st. But here's the thing, that is already a law. It's a pretty toothless law, but are people not aware of that?
They're not. We did this survey back in August when the schools were about to open up and suddenly they have no budget yet. And so we wanted to get a sense of how voters felt about this. 89% of them say the legislature should absolutely pass a budget before the schools open. 74% strongly supported that requirement. But as you mentioned, it is a requirement. But there's no teeth to that requirement. You know, Mike Duggan, the candidate for governor, and then the legislature began talking about this. Well, if you don't get a budget passed on time, the legislators should see their pay docked. Voters overwhelmingly agree with that. There's no hesitation from the voters in doing that. But voters don't follow this every day, frankly. They're living their lives. They're trying to, get their kids to school. They're trying to get to work. They're not following the budget in Lansing on a regular basis.
So how do we figure out this disconnect then of folks not really paying attention, and yet we know the power and the pressure campaign that voters can have on lawmakers when they really want something to happen?
Well, I think until it actually impacts the voters, we're not going to see that happen. What I mean by that is, I said earlier, voters have seen this, they've seen this play before. And it goes up until 1 minute before midnight and they pass something. Mm-hmm. And so voters aren't going to get too stressed about this right now until it happens. And then when it happens, the repercussions come down. Secretary of State's office may not be opened. You can't do basic government functions. Schools are going to have to really cut back because they don't know what their budgets are going to look like. All these things will start sending a domino effect down to the voters. I guarantee you at that point, the phones will start ringing in legislative offices.
We know a bit about voters' memories, and I'm wondering, this all isn't happening in a vacuum. How big a deal is this to voters compared to other things on the whole menu of issues that might be on their minds?
Well, we do talk to voters regularly, and what they're worried about right now is affording their groceries. That's at the top of their minds. Getting about their daily lives, paying their mortgage and their rent, that's at the top of their list. This is not something that voters even want to deal with. I kind of compare it to your insurance company. You don't ever want to interact with your insurance company unless you need them, and then they better be there. Suddenly, the voters don't ever want to interact with the state budget until it's not there. Then they're going to get upset. So then we'll see it rise up in importance. But until then, this is just some random thing they occasionally see in the media.
We're speaking with Pollster Richard Czuba, founder of Glengariff Group. So, Richard, let's talk about the political consequences for lawmakers and the governor if there is a shutdown next week. What do we know about who voters would hold responsible?
Yeah, we actually asked this question. We said if the state legislature were not to pass a budget by October 1st, who would you blame? 17% said they'd blame the state house led by Republicans. 13% said they'd blame Governor Whitmer. 5.5% said they'd blame the state Senate led by Democrats. But 62% of voters said they'd blame everyone equally. And the one thing that is bipartisan across the board these days, there aren't many issues that are. Sticking it to the legislature and blaming elected officials is a bipartisan thing.
What does that tell you about where voters are right now and just how they're feeling?
I think they're feeling frustrated by the system. They don't see basic things happening and working anymore, which, as we relay that to politics, gives rise to this center, this independent candidacy that Mike Duggan is running right now. I think he, strangely, is quite a beneficiary of just the complete dysfunction going on over the state budget. And he is saying the message, neither side can get anything done. We need somebody from the center. And that's going to resonate with voters in lack of a budget.
In the governor's race, we sort of see, Lansing and legislative leaders handing Mike Duggan this almost in-kind contribution. But it's not going to be just the governor's race on the ballot. It's going to be Republicans and Democrats running for the legislature. And we know that during elections where voters have their say, those are zero-sum games. There's a winner, there's a loser. Based on your polling, with this particular issue in play, who wins and loses at the ballot box?
Well, I think it hurts incumbent legislators, people who are involved in the process. Every once in a while, we have this, what I call a throw all the bums out year. And it's this kind of issue that feeds into that. We ask the voters, if the budget is not passed, state doesn't have a budget, would you be more or less likely to vote for someone that didn't pass the budget on time? And 63% of voters said they'd be less likely to vote for someone who didn't pass the budget on time. Only 4% said they'd be more likely. 28% said it would make no difference. So that's a big majority of voters who are going to look at their elected officials and say, well, why didn't you pass it on time? Why couldn't you compromise? Why couldn't you figure something out? And so I think incumbent legislators are going to pay a price for this. And, voters are seeing this dysfunction going on in our politics, and it's just turning so many people off from it. There's this attitude of, why is everyone being an idiot?
Richard, I'm thinking about the months where it felt like Republican Speaker Matt Hall kind of took up all the oxygen in Lansing. He was holding weekly press conferences. There were a lot of questions in Lansing about where Governor Gretchen Whitmer was in all of this. How did that play into voters' minds in terms of the consequences of who they would blame if there was a partial shutdown?
I don't think it did. And I say that because It was summer in Michigan, and nobody was paying attention. The voters were at the lake with their families, with their kids on vacation, having a great summer. This isn't what they want to pay attention to. And frankly, with this dispersed media we have, there's no consistent drumbeat voters are hearing of this happening anymore. We don't share the media the way we used to. It's all very diluted. And so that just dilutes voters' attitude until the moment it actually happens.
Well, to that point of diluting attention, I understand that voters could hold incumbents responsible in 2026. But I'm also thinking about just how much happens in American politics right now. Just every single week and every single day, there's a new headline. How likely is it that if there was a shutdown in Lansing, it would actually stick in voters' minds in an election that is still a year away?
We don't know the answer to that. It seems like nothing lasts in the voters' minds for long. But I think the consequence is the cumulative effect of all of this. Mm-hmm. It isn't just one thing. It's countless things happening right now that will start to add up. I watch polling numbers very closely. We do this constantly. And the one thing I know is rarely do numbers shift wholesale. Rarely is there just a knee-jerk change amongst the voters. It is small, incremental changes that occur. And, a state budget shutdown is the kind of thing that adds to those incremental shifts and changes amongst the voters, where they get increasingly frustrated over this. Nobody voted to have state government shut down. They voted to elect people who will manage government, who will make some common sense choices. That's a big word with voters, common sense, and who will get things done. And that's what they're looking for. And the more frustrated they get, the more volatile the next election becomes also.
I guess that's my next question. Politically speaking, is a shutdown worth it? We have Governor Gretchen Whitmer, saying no budget unless there is a roads deal. We have Speaker Matt Hall, House Republicans, saying waste, fraud, and abuse. We need to make the budget smaller. Are those priorities worth the political consequences of a shutdown?
It's interesting you mentioned those things because essentially what we're hearing is each side staking their ground, seeing what's important to them. And it may be important to their base voters, but what's important to those independents, those centrist voters, and we regularly talk about this, how they make all the decisions in Michigan.
Yes, we do.
What's important to them is that you figure this out, is that you compromise with each other and get something done, something passed. That's what resonates with those independents. So you may have the left saying, this is our territory, this is what our voters care about, and they're correct. And the right is saying, we want limited government, we want cuts. Their voters are saying, yeah, that's correct. But if either side wants to win, they better figure out how to get this done because that's what appeals to the middle.
Maybe this gets back to what you were talking about before as far as people holding incumbents liable for this sort of dysfunction. So we also have simultaneously the budget standoff in D.C. Does this all get mixed into that? Are these things considered separate? Is this an invitation for the public, voters, to look at this and just say it's all dysfunctional everywhere?
I think it's going to be interesting to see how the two separate issues play out. But if both of them move towards a shutdown, both in Washington and in Lansing, then yes, the voters are going to be angry. They are going to, as I mentioned the word dysfunction earlier, they are just going to be sick of the dysfunction. And, it could easily become a throw the bums out kind of year. We want change. We want people who get something done. And what that looks like, I think it's too early to tell. And how this all plays out, frankly, is going to depend on what actually happens. We don't know that either.
And finally, Richard, you watch Michigan politics just so closely. With a week out from a possible shutdown, what do you think is going to happen in Lansing? And how would you counsel these lawmakers?
Well, I mentioned that voters have kind of seen this before. We saw this in 2009, which was a very different period, frankly, in Michigan. Back in 2009, voters overwhelmingly thought the state was going in the wrong direction. That's not the case now. In fact, we see at least a plurality, if not a majority of voters saying Michigan's heading in the right direction. But until this happens, we're not going to get a full effect of how angry voters are going to be about this. If I were counseling people, I'd say cut the crap. Sit down in a room and lock the door and don't come out until you figure out what the deal is. And we all know that's where this is going to go. It's where it has to go. That's where it's always gone. So do it. I do think there are some questions about why budgets have been passed so late. There's that law in place for a July 1st budget. Why is it that wasn't passed? I think voters are going to, if there is no budget in place by October 1st, that's going to be a significant question of why did everybody wait so long? And I'm not sure everybody did here. So that's going to come into play. But in terms of counseling people, yeah, I've been watching this a long time. It used to be a day where people would, governors would call the legislative leaders in the door, shut the door and say, what do you need? What do you need? How are we going to get this done? And they'd figure it out. That needs to happen again. All the leadership needs to act like adults, realize there's going to be compromise, and figure out what the compromise is.
That is Richard Czuba, pollster, founder of Glengariff Group, and someone who always makes us a little smarter. Richard, thanks so much.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
For more details about where things stand with the state budget, how you may be impacted if there's a partial state government shutdown next week, find more details at the website michiganpublic.org/itsjustpolitics. And while you're there, you can sign up for the It's Just Politics newsletter. Every Friday afternoon, we are in your inbox with the latest from Lansing and across the state in Michigan politics. And that is It's Just Politics for today. I am Zoe Clark.
And I'm Rick Pluta.
Let's talk again next week.